Aviation in the 1920s. In the 1920s, aviation was on the rise. Airplanes were being used to transport passengers and freight. After World War I, airplanes were much more reliable and more capable of flying longer distances, as well as carrying heavier loads. This made life much more easier in general, being able to travel longer distances quicker, whether it be passengers or mail. Pilots who returned from World War I offered themselves as entertainment for the public. They traveled across the country, stopping in small towns to show off their piloting skills. The skilled pilots were a hit across the nation, as some were treated as celebrities. In 1927, the first airport terminal was built in the form of a waiting room and ticket office for airline passengers. The terminal was established at the Ford Airport at Dearborn, Michigan. By the year 1929, some airports had terminals that offered comfortable waiting rooms. Most of the airports were nothing more than just open fields. The planes in the 1920s had come a long way from the earlier models. The increased capabilities of the planes created opportunities for men and women to set records that had to do with speed and distance. This captured the minds of the public. They loved the new flying machines and were amazed at the sight of what these people could do with them. Charles Lindbergh was one of the most accomplished pilots of his time. One of his greatest accomplishments was flying across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris in 33.5 hours. This was the first non-stop solo transatlantic flight, and he did it on such a tiny plane, the Spirit of St. Louis. When he landed in Paris, he was swarmed by a crowd of over 100,000 people. His accomplishment had immediate and immense impact on the world. As soon as President Coolidge heard that Lindbergh's flight was successful, he ordered that he return to America to receive the Distinguished Flying Cross. His feat instantly propelled him as a cultural icon, and his life would never be the same.
This plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, is shown landing in New York after breaking the speed record for flying across America. Its pilot was Charles A. Lindbergh, a then unknown airmail pilot. He was determined to win the $25,000 prize being offered to the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. On May 20th, 1927, his small plane was towed from its Long Island hangar. Overloaded with fuel, he barely cleared the end of the runway at takeoff. An anxious world followed every news bulletin. 34 hours later, Lindbergh landed and was welcomed by 100,000 cheering Parisians. He was awarded the French Legion of Honor. An American Navy cruiser was sent by President Coolidge to bring both the plane and the pilot back to Washington, D.C. Once there, Lindy was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He married heiress Anne Morrow, and they settled in New Jersey. Tragedy struck in 1930 when their first child was kidnapped and murdered. International headlines followed the case to a small New Jersey courthouse where District Attorney David Wilentz established the guilt of kidnapper Bruno Richard Hauptmann. When World War II began, Lindbergh felt we should remain neutral. However, once America entered the war, Lindbergh went to work, first on bomber production, then in the Pacific, where our bombers were suffering heavy losses. P-38 fighter planes could not carry enough fuel to accompany and protect bombers on long-range missions. Lindbergh devised a method for increasing the P-38's range and changed the course of the air war. This innovation got him promoted to general in the Air Force Reserve. But it was Lucky Lindy most Americans remember. As Mayor Jimmy Walker said in 1927, "New York is yours. I didn't give it to you, you won it. And before you leave, you'll have to provide us with a new street cleaning department." Will Rogers best described this man of vision and determination.
Every man that flies the ocean from now on will always be just an imitation of Lindbergh.
Amelia Earhart took her first ride in an airplane in 1920, and after that ride she knew she was going to fly. Within a few days she had her first lesson and she was off. At first she wasn't the most skilled pilot, but she persevered and she broke the women's altitude record in 1922. Amy Guest selected Amelia Earhart to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in place of her. On June 19, 1928, Amelia Earhart would become the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Throughout the rest of her years, Earhart would go on to set more records and become the face of the aviation industry.